this production of Oneday at Aine Castle Blaney. The cast are already on stage, recreating a scene from the Galway Occupy protest, which featured on the front page of the Connolly Sentinel on the 13th of March 2012. We can give people time to turn off their phones. As part of the Occupy, this used to happen in Galway in 2012.
Who is
Oh, it's an alarm.
it's the lady behind.
The audience turn off their mobile phones. The cast are on stage recreating a scene from the Galway Occupy protest. They offer the audience tea and coffee and biscuits. They engage the audience in a discussion on the Occupy protest and what it means. They invite one member of the audience to hand out copies of the Connolly Sentinel. The drummer walks around with a drum, creating a simple rhythm, and asks some audience members to join him. He then does the fire announcement.
Thank you all for joining us here this evening. The fire exits are the doors that you've come in, and these doors here to the side. For anybody who hasn't yet, why not take this opportunity to turn your phone off?
Shane, the performer, is engaging the audience in a discussion on the Occupy protest and what it means. He then performs as spokesperson for the Galway Occupy camp.
I'm sure you've all been reading that Galway City Council are asking us to move on. Some people have mentioned that Dublin Occupy shut down and Cork Occupy shut down a couple of days ago. I just want to reassure you all that we here at Galway Occupy are not going anywhere. We're going to be here for a long while yet. Galway Occupy lasted for another 63 days, in fact, and finally dismantled on the 6th of May 2012.
I know where I was on that day, more or less, because a play I was working on was featured in that paper. I used to live in Galway at the time, about 2 streets behind me on Flood Street, and I used to walk past the Occupy protest most days. I really wanted to join, but I never did. What do you know? My father would say at the time. Smarter men than you and me have been working all this out. What do you really know about the global financial crisis? I looked at my brethren in the Occupy camp, and they were standing many miles away from Wall Street or Brussels or Dublin, where the real decisions they were protesting against were taking place. In my mind, I asked them the same questions my father asked me. What did they know that people more educated in the issues didn't know? What did they really know about how the world worked? I wanted to understand how the world worked, so I decided to start with that day, the 13th of March 2012. Shane, can you give us a rundown of the main headlines from that day? Maybe give us the roundup on the front page of the Wall Street Journal.
Worldwide, the Republican race tightened in the Deep South. Polls showed Romney running even with Santorum and Gingrich in Mississippi and Alabama on the eve of primary day. The 2 states, with many evangelical conservative voters, have been considered difficult terrain for Romney. Santorum and Gingrich signalled they intend to stay in the race after Tuesday, regardless of their showing. GOP candidates are scrambling to nail down unbound delegates from states that have already held caucuses. US commanders had mobilised a search party to hunt for a soldier after he left his post in Afghanistan, but were too late to stop him from allegedly killing 16 civilians. Egyptian officials said Israel and Gaza militants agreed to a truce after 4 days of fighting that saw 25 Palestinians killed and rockets fired into southern Israel. Russia's foreign minister condemned what he called foreign support for terrorists in Syria as he and Clinton clashed at the UN. The Justice Department blocked the Texas law that requires voters to show state-issued photo ID, citing the measure's effect on Hispanics. A section of rail line in China collapsed 2 months before it was set to open, the latest blow to the country's high-speed rail ambitions. Nuclear regulators said a fire last year at a Nebraska plant, which came after workers ignored warning signs, was a high-level risk. A judge is set to rule whether prosecutors must provide more details about sex abuse charges against former Penn State assistant coach Sandusky. Attacks in Iraq killed 14 people as insurgents struck security forces, a government office, and jewellery stores. Bulger's companion will change plea to guilty and admit to helping the alleged crime boss evade capture. Pacific Gas and Electric Company agreed to pay San Bruno, California $70 million over deadly 2010 pipeline blast that incinerated a neighbourhood. A mosque near Brussels was the target of an arson attack in which the imam died, Belgian authorities said. Died. Minoru Mori, 77. Real estate magnate who helped transform Tokyo's skyline. Vital signs. Yield on Italy's 10-year government bond. Italy's borrowing costs, which some investors consider a gauge of the severity of Europe's sovereign debt crisis, have tumbled in 2012. The yield on the Italian 10-year government bond inched up to 4.918% Monday, but is far below the 7% level notched in January. On November 25th, Italian bond yields hit 7.33%, a level economists warn is unsustainable over the long run.
I felt lost in this continent. I felt ashamed to go on learning off pieces of newspaper forever. That's not what I wanted at all.
I wanted to do this show because I wanted to take the time to understand the news from this one day. Normally you only get 24 hours to understand a day's news, if even. But I wanted to take the time to spend as long as I wanted to understand the day's news properly, in such a way that I could perform it truthfully. Maybe I'm like an actor who spends years studying the lines of Hamlet, except it's not Hamlet, it's newspaper articles.
Shane, how long have you been an actor?
Since 2011.
And why did you become an actor?
I wanted to spend my life doing something that I love doing.
What role would you love to play?
I'd really, really, really love to play Count Dracula on Broadway.
So, why did you agree to do this experiment?
I wanted to do this experiment because I wanted to take the time to understand the news from this one day. Normally you only get 24 hours to understand a day's news, if even, but I wanted to take the time to spend as long as I wanted to understand the day's news properly in such a way that I could perform it truthfully.
Okay. Tell us about the difficulties that you found doing this experiment.
I'm the only actor on stage. There was a constantly changing script. And the sheer volume of articles I had to go through.
How many articles?
I studied about 2,000.
Tell us which one was most interesting for you.
There was one about a Mayo man who said he had no choice but to kill a burglar who he said had been terrorising him for months.
And why that one?
It allowed me to express a really unpopular opinion I have during rehearsals.
Which is?
I believe that if someone comes onto your property to do you harm, you should be allowed to kill them.
Can you tell us how you came about this opinion?
As most of you here know, Mum normally lives alone in the country. And a few years ago I was at home living with her for a while. I arrived back to the house one day, and as I was putting the key into the lock, I noticed that it was all damaged. I walked into the kitchen and things were an absolute mess. There were drawers open, papers everywhere, stuff all over the place, and again, as most of you know, this is highly, highly unusual in Mum's house. I realised quite quickly that we had been burgled, and my first thought was, wow, maybe these guys are still in the house. So I walked over to the cutlery drawer, opened it, took out a steak knife, and I went to go look for them. But just before I left the kitchen, I stopped and I really thought about what I was doing. And I thought, no, that's not a good idea. They'd taken Mum's good gold jewellery. They knew exactly what they were looking for. But the point is that ever since that day, Mum has felt a little less secure in her own house. She felt the need to lock the gate for years. And I think if I had met somebody in the house that day and killed them, I wouldn't be sorry. With 100% honesty, I could look that person's father directly in the eye and say, listen, yes, I am sorry for the grief that you feel. I am sorry for your sense of loss. But I am not sorry that I killed your son.
It seemed clear to me that as a performer, there was something he could teach me.
What are we doing?
I saw him stare at me looking for direction, but I didn't have any. I didn't know if this experiment was going to go anywhere. I thought maybe I could be just another pretentious director trying to bluff his way onto the stage. But I also knew if I didn't perform my role as director, then nothing would happen in the room. Loud drumming.
Show attack here for the yoke through field yell. Gunther Yoke, 55, has never experienced anything like this before. Live on TV in his Ard talk show, 5.63 million people watch as the moderator is attacked by his own guest. The reason? His millions of euro. Theme of the program: the deep fall of Christian Wolf. One of the guests is Henning Scherf, Mayor of Bremen, 1995 to 2005. Jauch, the moderator, he shows a feature film which compares Wolf's 199,000 euro honorary pension with that of the average pensioner's pension entitlement. Scherf's collar bursts. He points to Jauch and says, "You also have to be critical of yourself, my dear Gunther Jauch, about what you were earning this year. You earn many times what the Federal Chancellor earns, and you consider it fair." Jauch, you do not know that. Sure. It's not fair! Our salaries are unfairly distributed. Applause in the studio. Jauch tried to defend himself. I never stated that the figure was fair. Never complained either.
I find the Henning Scherf lines interesting. Could you do those lines again, please?
You also have to be critical of yourself, my dear Gunther Jauch, about what you were earning this year. You earn many times what the Federal Chancellor earns, and you consider it fair.
You do not know that.
It's not fair! Our salaries are unfairly distributed!
When you think about Scherf in this scene, I want you to think about the bravery of it, okay? He's a low-grade mayor, he's on this big TV show like Pat Kinney or something, and he's going to call out this moderator, this presenter, about his wages. Think about the audience. It could go wrong, you know, he could look foolish in front of the audience. Could you show us that, please?
You also have to be critical of yourself, my dear Gunther Jauch, about what you were earning this year. You earn many times what the Federal Chancellor earns, and you consider it fair.
You do not know that.
It's not fair! Our salaries are unfairly distributed. And you, Dermot Carter, you need to be critical of yourself. You earn many times what I earn. You consider it fair.
I never said it was fair.
It's not fair! Our salaries are unfairly distributed.
You do not know that. You do not know that. Can you say that line again?
You do not know that.
I felt something strong when I heard that line. I remember being told that line many times in my life. Did you ever have an argument with someone and afterwards think about what you should have said? I wrote this scene based on an article on the economic situation in Spain on that day. So I turned to him to discuss Spain's deficit. And to be honest, I don't even know if I know what a deficit is. Explain it to me.
He needs to try to understand it. I now play the incredulous father who undermines all his attempts.
Things continued as such between us. I had a lot to learn and he had not. His practical experience made up for any technical knowledge that I had. He somehow would not listen to me, so I tried to lay it out in clear terms that the ECB is under a mandate to keep the deficits low, which actually means they want to keep unemployment high.
The deficit I'm talking about is different to a budget deficit.
But I felt weak. My hand clenched its own fist, and I could see my words were faltering. It wasn't that he proved me wrong, but rather, my words had failed to bring down his stubborn wall of resistance. He wasn't proved wrong, and that was enough of a victory for him. I could tell by his glee that he was now just going to think what he wanted to think all along.
I tried another route. Did you know that the main thing to keep the deficit down is to keep unemployment high? Did you know that?
Do I know what?
The main thing to keep exports high is to keep wages low. Best way to keep wages low is to keep plenty of people unemployed so there's a lot of competition for wages.
But people get paid what they deserve to get paid. Or what they demand to get paid.
Don't be stupid.
What do you mean don't be stupid?
You just said a stupid thing!
I backtracked. I'd crossed the line. Now his defences are up and he feels justified. My aggression was wrong, but that led him to think that my point was wrong also. He'd never listened to me now. I should have maintained my rationality. I'll have to be even more rational now if I'm to carry on.
Germany breaks the EU rules by artificially keeping their surpluses high.
I decided to keep my cool and not react to this. Everybody wants to keep their surpluses high, and that's a fact. Nobody wants to lose money. Is that true?
Is that true? You got me, but I believe they do. Spain, like it's a fucking joke. Unemployment is crazy over there.
Plenty of characters happy enough being employed, I'd say, over there. How do they keep their surpluses high?
The ECB want Germany to stop running a surplus, but Germany keeps breaking those rules. A surplus is as bad as a deficit because it forces other countries to run a deficit then. China breaks this rule too.
I suppose you're right. The ideas he proposed started to mingle with my own. I thought about internal devaluation. I thought what a great country we were because we'd actually pulled off internal devaluation, which no other country in Europe thought we could do. But the thought dissolved and was replaced by another I understood much less. I began to think, maybe Germany is the biggest fool of them all. I observed him drinking Sidona for a moment and watching football. I thought maybe I'd leave him for now. He seemed happy.
I watched the football by myself. The commentator's imposition of narrative onto something so technical disturbed me. We were watching the complex interplay of simultaneous variables. It was beyond reducibility. So it could contain what I call my soul. Spain's Premier Mariano Rajoy had played a stellar performance. He'd extracted a lower deficit target from his EU partners. That was more money in the bank for Spain. There was tension about money all over the world that day. I guess it's a sign of the times. In other places too, there was tension. Brutal bodily tension. Nerves, muscles, and flesh. On the 13th of March 2012, the second most common article we came across had to do with a massacre that had taken place in Homs in Syria. This took place as part of the wider Syrian civil war that was raging at the time. Now on one side we have the rebels, or the opposition, and on the other side we have the government. Who here knows who was in charge of the Syrian government at that time? Full name, quickly. Who said that? Quick. First name, quick. All the way through quickly, gets the lollipop. There, it's you. Well done. Bashar al-Assad, yes indeed. Let's get on to Homs. Homs is Syria's third largest city. At this stage, the siege of Homs has been raging for about 10 months. Bashar al-Assad's troops have Homs totally encircled. However, inside of Homs, there are little pockets of resistance. One of these pockets is centered around a neighborhood called Karam el-Zaytun. David, repeat that.
Karam el-Zaytun.
Roll the R a little bit more. Karam el-Zaytun.
Karam el-Zaytun.
Good enough?
Yeah.
No, yes. Who said no? Who said no? You said no. You get a lollipop. Wow. On the night of the 9th of March, 2012, Bashar al-Assad's troops make their move. They roll into Karam el-Zaytun with 30 tanks and their army. It takes about 3 days, but they do eventually wrestle back control of Karam el-Zaytun. It is during this 3-day change of control that this massacre takes place. This massacre is the killing of men, women, and children. Some reports say 17, some reports say 45, some reports say as high as 77. What they all agree on, however, is that these people were civilians. Some of them had been shot, some of them had their throats slit, and some of them had been burnt. Bashar al-Assad, he insists that these civilians were killed by the rebels as they were retreating in order to embarrass him, because Kofi Annan was visiting Syria that day. The rebels, however, they insist that these people were killed by troops loyal to Bashar al-Assad in retribution for help they provided the rebels. Any questions?
Can you win?
Can you win? What do you mean?
These people. Damned if they do, damned if they don't, right?
I don't know.
That's the question.
Can you win? It's a very open question. I suppose I was looking for something a little bit more specific. But that's fine. I think you get a lollipop for a lovely question. Any other questions? Got one more lollipop on hold over there. I've studied Syria quite extensively. I've studied this massacre quite extensively. You need a lollipop, don't you? You need a lollipop to say anything. It's amazing. Okay, one more lollipop. This is... it's the best one. It's Coca-Cola flavored. It's the best one. I'll swap. Excellent job. Now I've got second-hand apple.
Yeah. See what I mean?
Apple. Lovely, yeah, it's not great, is it? But it still should elicit a response, no? Question?
What's the truth?
Dermot.
What did Kofi Annan have to say?
Kofi Annan didn't actually say anything about the massacre. He was in town to try to get his 6-point peace plan into Syria at the time. At the time, Bashar al-Assad was making noises to say that he was on board with the 6-point peace plan, and I can only I won't speculate. But he didn't say anything particular about this massacre.
How do you know what actually happened?
Do I know?
Yeah.
I don't know.
But it's a question. How do you know what you do know?
Well, I studied it. As I said, there were lots and lots of newspaper reports from that day and from the days preceding and after it as well. There were eyewitness reports. Some of the eyewitnesses were given testimony to the newspapers. One of these eyewitnesses said that he was part of the massacre and he just somehow escaped. Most of the other eyewitness reports, and most, let's say 99% of the articles that we came across, had to do with eyewitnesses who were actually in field hospitals. And the field hospitals were where the bodies were taken from where they were shot and gathered together. So that's all there was. There was also 2 videos that I watched, not pleasant, but they show the aftermath of the massacre. You see lots of dead bodies being wrapped, blood. Not pleasant.
Do they know for definite who did the shooting?
No, they don't. That's, both sides are saying different stories. Depending on the newspaper, they say a different story. Some newspapers just give the facts. The Financial Times just like to give the facts. Irish Times leans one way, other newspapers lean another way.
Well, I presume they're just being regarded as collateral damage and there's been, it's not been taken any further, is it?
The Siege of Homs was continuing. This was an active war zone at the time. The Siege of Homs actually continued for another 2 years after this massacre. So this is just one incident / massacre inside a wider Siege of Homs, inside a wider Syrian civil war that was all over the place. So collateral, perhaps. So interestingly, though, it was the first time that the government said that they were civilians killed. First time. Before that, they had always said it was rebels or counterinsurgents or anything like that. This is the first time that they said that these people, both sides, agree that they're civilians.
And what happened to the 6-point peace plan?
It died a death after about 6 weeks, 7 weeks. It was never, seemingly it was never on board. It was a proposal by the UN. Kofi Annan was the Syrian special envoy from the UN, and he was there in order to try to get this 6-point plan across. It didn't work. Syrian civil war still going. Sorry, Paul.
Is that before or after Mary Colvin?
Say,
Did this happen before or after Mary Colvin was killed in Homs? Or
who?
Mary Colvin, the journalist?
This is something I don't know about. That's interesting.
No, I know. She was killed by Assad in Homs.
Okay.
Shane, could you look that up for the next show?
I will, of course. That's really interesting. Thank you. The name again, please?
Mary Colvin. I think there's a film.
Mary Colvin,
Mary Colvin.
Irish journalist.
She was Sunday Times journalist.
Fantastic. Oh, okay. Well, not fantastic. But
Yeah, patch.
okay, interesting. Well, lovely.
Lollipop.
What's that?
Lollipop.
Well, that I think that deserves a What's that? What's that?
Different questions there.
Well, look, share it around. Look, at she was quick to get it into her mouth first.
It's not a cola valley in a while.
Well, sorry. I'll know for next time. When we come back again, I'll have all Coca-Cola lollipops. I swear.
How many people died? Just to give us a fresh.
Again, reports are different. Reports are different. Some reports say 17. This one says 45, and some say as high as 77. Wikipedia says 77. Well, some articles in Wikipedia say
And do we have
77.
any names of the people that died?
There is a list. Somebody has tried to compile a list of the names. Yes, indeed. I did read them, and not one of them stuck with me.
How many is on that list?
I didn't count exactly.
Okay, do that as well for the next show. No rest.
Or else.
How many, you watched the video,
Yep.
right? How many people were in the video? How many bodies did you see?
Again, very difficult to discern exactly. There were 2 rooms. Both videos had 2 rooms. In the first one I saw 14, and in the second one I saw a further 3. And the same in the second video was about 15 and 3. But it's very hard to see if there were bodies or not. They were wrapped in shrouds, as is the way they do it. They wrapped them in shrouds, and so I couldn't say exactly.
If you knew the bodies, will you recognise them?
If I knew the bodies,
Yeah.
there were 1 or 2 that weren't shrouded, and you might be able to recognise these faces, but most of them were completely wrapped.
Where did it happen? You said rooms there. You mentioned rooms.
It was in a certain neighbourhood, in this Caramel Zaytoun neighbourhood,
Yeah.
and it was actually in lots of different locations within that neighbourhood, and the rebels collected the bodies. And they took them all to this field hospital, which was serving as a field hospital. They thought that Bashar al-Assad's troops would hide the evidence. That's what they said, and so they wanted to take them together and film it and document it.
But it's a good point, it's just in a room.
So those people move, but that means that lots of, there's people that couldn't be accounted for, or...
All of the above, yeah, absolutely. All of the above. Information is very patchy.
Shane, when will they be accounted for?
I actually don't think they will ever be accounted for. As I said to Bonnie, the Siege of Homs continued for about 2 more years, and it was completely and utterly destroyed. I don't think we'll ever know what happened.
Shane, how old are you?
38.
Ethnicity.
White.
What's your favourite sport?
Football.
Football. You look like a footballer. Did you ever do it professionally?
No, but funny you ask, the guy who replaced me on my local team went on to play running back for Notre Dame, so kind of have a connection to that world.
So what was your first proper job then?
10. My first proper job was a stockbroker.
And how long did you do that for?
A couple of years.
And can you tell people why you stopped?
I lost a lot of money and subsequently had my license revoked.
A lot of money, yeah? How much money?
$1.5 million.
Ooh. And now you're here, back home in Castleblaney.
Yeah.
So why did you join the US Army at that time?
It was after 9/11. I just thought it was my duty to sign up and serve my country.
And how long did you serve with them?
Almost 10 years exactly.
So Robert Bales is a US soldier in Afghanistan. He was 38 years old, white, and a former stockbroker. On March 10th, 2012, he went on a killing spree. It was the most common front page article that we came across. Unlike the massacre in Homs, Syria, which was also reported on the same day, this massacre was highly documented. What Robert Bales did, I can tell you very precisely. For example, on the day of the massacre, he spent 8 hours smashing up a tree. Can we see you do that, Shane? The tree was used to coordinate a Taliban booby trap that had blown his colleagues' legs off.
This tree was used to hurt my friends, ma'am.
A direct quote. We know he was abusing steroids and taking sleeping tablets at the time. On the evening of the massacre, he was drinking whiskey with his colleagues and watching a movie called Man on Fire. Later that night, when everyone had gone to sleep, he got up, put on a military poncho and night vision goggles and made his way to a tiny Afghan village less than a kilometre away. At the first compound, he encountered Night Marga, a grandmother and her grandchildren, asleep in a single room. Bales shouted at them to wake them up, herded them into another room, pushed them to the floor and stomped on the grandmother when she resisted. He then entered another room where Khadija Dad, a 35-year-old farmhand, was sleeping. He shot Khadija Dad while he slept. Meanwhile, Night Marga and her grandchildren had escaped to a third house. Bales followed him across a courtyard. A dog barked at him and he shot it. Before entering the next house, Nazir Mohammed emerged from it and attempted to speak to the US soldier. Bales grabbed Nazir Mohammed and started to beat him, shouting, "Where are the Taliban?" Nazir Mohammed's wife screamed at Bales, imploring him to stop. A 3-year-old child ran towards Bales and Bales shot the child dead. Bales later claimed that it was at this point that he began to lose control. Bales then returned to Nazir Mohammed and shot him dead too. In the meantime, the grandmother and grandchildren and everybody else had escaped to a third house, belonging to Mohammed Naeem, an old man whose heart medicine had allowed him to sleep through all the noise. Everybody ran into the old man's room, looking for him to protect them. The old man told them to be quiet and to hide, and he would go speak to the US soldier himself. As soon as the old man put his head out the door, Bales shot him. Bales then looked into the room full of women and children. He recognised Night Marga, the grandmother from the first house. He shot her in the head. He then opened fire, spraying a fusillade of bullets into the room. After that, he left the Afghan village and returned to the US base camp. Somehow the fusillade of bullets didn't kill anybody, but many were still badly injured. Sadiqullah, a 10-year-old boy, had bullets in his skull. Rafiola, a 13-year-old boy, had bullets in both thighs. He now has to use a walking aid for the rest of his life. Zardina, a 7-year-old girl, had severe head wounds and lost the use of her right arm and leg. One of the boys, a young boy called Faizullah, ran to get a car started and drove his wounded siblings to a nearby US Army hospital. When they got there, his sister Parmina refused to be seen by male medics and had to wait several hours before they could examine her body, which was full of gunshot wounds. the US base camp, he woke up his young 21-year-old sergeant and told him what he had done. The sergeant later claimed he thought Bales was sleepwalking. Bales refused to leave the sergeant until the sergeant agreed to take care of his wife and children. The sergeant said he agreed just so he could go back to sleep. Bales then left the US base camp one more time and made his way to another Afghan village called Najaf Bien. His wife Masuma and their 6 children were all sheltered in the same room. Bales entered this room. Shouting the word Talib, he grabbed Mohammed Dawood, dragged him outside and shot him. He then grabbed Masuma and threatened her by putting his gun into her infant's mouth. Somehow, Masuma screamed at him so loudly that he took the gun back out of the infant's mouth. She said he stood there frozen. Then somehow she continued to scream at him so loudly that he turned and left without harming any of the rest of her family. Bales then made his way to another house belonging to Mohammed Wazir. Before entering, a dog barked at him and he shot it. Mohammed Wazir wasn't at home at the time, he was in another town with one of his sons. Instead, Bales met his wife, his mother, his nephew and his 6 children all in the same room. A young boy ran at Bales with a shovel and hit him on the back as hard as he could. Bales merely turned and flipped the boy onto his head, overcoming him easily with one arm. Bales then murdered all 9 people in the room, attacking one member of the family so badly that skin and hair was left stuck to the wall. While this was happening, Mohammed Wazir's brother and sister-in-law were hiding in another room. Bales found them and murdered them, and their bodies were set on fire. Burning a dead body is sacrilegious in Afghanistan, but Bales says it was an accident. Finally, Bales met an old woman called Shatarina. He shot Shatarina in the head and chest, but the bullets didn't kill her. He then began to beat her and stomped on her head until she died. Her face was unrecognisable when her family eventually discovered the body.
Now I think it hit me. Everything you've ever worked for, everything you've ever loved, is now, in a matter of hours, destroyed.
Bales put his gun into his own mouth, but decided against pulling the trigger. Instead, he returned to the base camp. When he got there were soldiers out waiting for him. Witnesses say he walked with the confident, methodical gait of a man who had accomplished his mission. He then recognised the 21-year-old sergeant he had met earlier. Witnesses say he shouted at him the following words.
You ratted me out, man!
When I started this project 4 years ago, I thought it would make me wiser because the news is based in reality. After looking at thousands of articles and doing many versions of the show, for some reason the following scenes have stayed with us.
Oh, Robin van Persie. happens. Of course I do. He's only been out injured. He comes back, scores another 2 goals. So yeah, come on, Arsenal! Robin van Persie. Oh, 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 Robin van
Japanese Athletic Association announced its 12 candidates for the London Olympics 2012.
Anata Fujiwara! Anata Fujiwara! Anata Fujiwara! Anata Fujiwara, what are you doing here, Anata? Anata Fujiwara, he ran the Tokyo Marathon 2 hours, 7 minutes, 40 seconds. Anata Fujiwara! Woo! Anata! And Yoshimi Ozaki! Yoshimi! What are you doing in Castlevania, Yoshimi? Yoshimi Ozaki! Yoshimi Ozaki, everybody! Yoshimi Ozaki! Yoshimi Ozaki! Woo! Yoshimi, she ran the marathon 2 hours, 23 minutes, 30 seconds. I just really want to show you, right, how fast those times actually are, right? So, when I go to the gym, or run with those 2 buckos up there, I normally start off at about 12 kilometers an hour or so. Dermot has a wee app. And then try to go a little faster after you're warmed up, you know. Woo. A couple of laps of the island. Towards the end, we can see the cars. Like, right, push as hard as we can. Ready? Okay. Which is normally about 20 kilometers an hour max. These people, they run at more than 20 kilometers an hour for more than 2 hours. I think that's amazing. Now you know what it's like to lose something. Knockmore, to lose its historic post office. Knockmore, to lose its historic post office.
Thank you, Shane. I think the reason these scenes made it through so many versions of the show is because of what the performer is doing. He's trying to entertain us.
Yeah, I'm an actor. Of course I'm going to try to entertain. I mean, anyway, newspapers are mostly written and read as entertainment. Only occasionally is there anything to learn from them.
I tell Shane it's not as simple as that. It's more complicated. I'm saying you're very negative about what we can do.
Maybe.
I'm going to look at another article, and I'm going to do it on my own for now. It's a tiny article in the Irish Examiner. Thank you. It's about a mother who, from Cork, from the Model Farm Road in Cork, and the banks were trying to stop her from transferring ownership for home to her children. Actually, is anybody here from Cork? Anyone know Cork at all? You know it, yeah? Do you know the Model Farm Road? You do? Do you know Eileen Daly in the model? James Daly? Okay. Well, Eileen Daly lives in Kinvara, Woodley Park, the Model Farm Road in Cork, and she was fighting the banks back in 2012. She owed ACC Bank 2.6 million euros, and she was trying to transfer ownership of her home to her sons, I imagine, so they wouldn't, the banks wouldn't take it off her. I was interested in this for two reasons. The first reason is, well, I actually had a friend who lived on a Model Farm Road back when I was in college, so I felt I had a connection to the article. But the big reason was because it was about a mother fighting the banks. And back in 2012 was when they were just starting to take properties off people. So I thought it was an interesting story to find out more about. Essentially, Eileen, the article is pretty small, as you can see. It doesn't mention much. It mentions Eileen owed 2.6 million euros to the banks. It also mentions her ex-husband for some reason. It says that he owed the same bank 2.5 million euros. And it also mentioned that her ex-husband was a tax inspector, or a former tax inspector. So I wanted to know more about what this was all about, you know. So first up, I called up Anne O'Loughlin, who wrote the article, and I spoke to her on the phone. And when I mentioned the article and I showed it to her, she did not remember writing it at all. She had written 7 articles on this one page alone, so I think over the years she might have written thousands of articles, so fair enough. But what she did say was that court reporting has to be 100% accurate, or else you could get sued. So I could trust every single word in this article. But every word isn't enough. I then decided to go online and look up any news articles online that might mention Eileen Daly or her ex-husband James Daly. Surprisingly, there was a few articles on the same day from different papers, but they all had the same information. Surprisingly, there was no follow-up to the story. I found nowhere mentioned what happened. The only other article was about her ex-husband's court case, which was held a month earlier. And the interesting thing about that case was, well, number one, he didn't turn up. And the second thing was he was stopped by the court from transferring money from a bank in Dundalk to a bank in Spain. Actually, is anyone here from Dundalk? Now that I say it. No? Anyone ever used the bank in Dundalk? Oh, this fella does. Yeah? AIB Bank, yeah? Interesting. You probably don't know James Daly, do you? Well, anyway, that's all I know, is that he used the bank in Dundalk, and I don't know what the name of the bank is. And again, there was no follow-up to that article, just mentioned the court case and didn't even say what the result of it was. Then I looked all the way up till today, like any article at all that might mention those two people. And surprisingly, there's nothing, except for in 2015, the ex-husband again turns up in the news. This time he owed Revenue 4 million euros. Revenue now is his former employer, by the way, you know. So I tried to find if there was anything more written about this or any investigation or anything. There was nothing, you know, I could find nothing nowhere. I thought maybe I'd leave the news behind and go to the law library and see what I could find there. Maybe there was some documents that referred to the cases. All I found was one document, and it mentions all the cases that were held on the day of the 2015 case. It just mentioned basically very little data really, just the amount of money he owed, the nature of the charge, his own name, and it mentioned one interesting thing. It gave his profession, accountant. So I decided, if I go to Cork and look up, I don't have to go to Cork, but go to the phone directory and look up any accountants in Cork, or in the Munster area by the name of James Daly, that could be my guy, you know. And I actually found a James Daly who's an accountant in Killarney. So I rang him up, spoke to him, but became very clear very quickly that that wasn't our man, unfortunately. I then decided to go online and maybe look up businesses, you know, that might have James Daly as the director and it's based in Cork. And I found out that James Daly is the director of a business called Galeport Limited. And I imagine no one has heard of this because when I looked up anything about this company, there's nothing apart from it being registered as Galeport Limited. The only clue was that on the registration it mentions that Galeport Limited is informally known as Mr. D's. And if anyone's familiar with Cork, I didn't know this, but apparently Mr. D's was the name of a Chinese restaurant in Glenmire. But the curious thing about that is that Mr. D's is closed down in 2017, and Galeport Limited is still trading in 2019. I then thought maybe I'll just ring up random accountants, you know, because in any industry it's usually a small pool of people, and ask them about James Daly, if they knew any James Daly accountants. They seemed to be very honest with me, they seemed genuine, but they had no idea who he was. They had no clue, nothing. I then began to think maybe he wasn't a chartered accountant. I then decided to go look up random houses on the Model Farm Road in the phone book and just call them up and ask them about him. Now in fairness, the Model Farm Road is a long road in Cork, but nobody seemed to know who he was. Well, I think they did. They just didn't want to talk to me about it. We were rehearsing in Wexford, and towards the end of the rehearsals, I was driving back home to Kerry. I decided, since I'm kind of going that way anyway, I'll stop off at the address. You know, and I know the address, it's the Kinvara Woodley Park, Model Farm Road, Cork. You can look it up online, you can see it in Google Maps. And I called round to the house, and went up to the door to knock. Now there was a car in the driveway, but it was like not a budge from the house. Maybe I was tipped off. I don't know. But I waited for about 10 minutes anyway, 10, 15 minutes, and no answer. Then I sat into my car and waited for about an hour in the car, see if anyone would come in or go. I just felt like even if they didn't want to talk to me, I could even ask, just, you could get something, you know? But nothing happened, and it was getting late and I had to go home. I tried really hard to find out everything I could about this article. You know, I had some really good information. You know, you had like a mother fighting the banks, you had a tax inspector on the run in Spain, you had a Chinese restaurant in Glenmire. But when I looked for the story behind this information, I found that it wasn't really out there, you know.
Why was I looking so hard into the life of Eileen Daly?
What was I hoping to find? What were you hoping to find?
On the 13th of March, 2012, I'm in court, accused of killing 3 men I met on dating websites. They say that I borrowed money off them and then killed them so I wouldn't have to pay them back. They say I used carbon monoxide poisoning by burning briquettes in a stove. You see,
I see myself a little bit like a crocodile. When I see what I want, I take it.
I'm feisty, I'll fight back.
I sat and watched him perform this Dracula character he created. It was very far from what I would have imagined myself. I would have thought about that character much differently.
Yeah. How so?
It just feels very like you, you know. I don't trust that.
You know, that undermines me when you say that. Especially in front of all these people. Brian?
Yeah.
Have some drums, please.
He was acting again, and it felt very reassuring.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Have you got some money to invest? Of course you have, don't answer. Do you want to make some more money? Of course you do. Do you know a good deal when you see one? Well, you wouldn't be where you are now if you didn't. As you can see from this article, there was a lot of excitement about coal and gas reserves that had been discovered there. The Financial Times says that it could be worth up to $80 billion. And it's just waiting to be opened up for the riches to flow on out of there. Has anyone ever been to Mozambique? Because if you have, I need you to come on down here and tell us all how great it is. Because it's not just thousands of miles of beautiful coastline. Year-round sunshine, lush, virgin farmland aching to be used. Una, have you ever tasted a papaya from Africa? Oh. It's a fully functioning democracy. It's a hard-working people. It's a young, vibrant population willing to do whatever it takes to make their country great again. All they need is investors. All they need is someone's foresight, someone's commitment, Brian. The soil is rich. All we need to do is to set the seed, and that tree will grow. And by tree, I mean that beautiful jobs will grow in that country. Great infrastructure projects will blossom, and a strong, healthy society will flourish. And we can all, us and them, sit under the shade of that tree and enjoy the fruit of our foresight. And when I'm talking fruit, Brendan, I'm talking lots and lots of money. Oh, yeah. It is September 26th, 2019. The ghost of my father appeared, and we began to talk. And by the ghost of my father, I mean a symbolic representation of any form of authority within our lives. Not much happened between us, but I think it's worth retelling. I hate to say it, but I think Assad is the best of a bad lot. Russia, in fairness, did the right thing.
Shane, have you ever heard of Vladimir Putin? Do you think he's a good fella?
I'm not saying Putin's a good fella. I'm saying it was a tough call and Russia made the right call.
Russia is an oligarchy.
Look, all you've got on the other side is the likes of ISIS, the Levant Front, al-Nusra, Jaish al-Ahrar. His eyes glazed over when I mentioned these groups. He didn't know them. He was going to drift off, so I simplified my argument. It's just, right now, the only option for Syrians is between a Sharia state and a dictator.
There's more options than that.
No, there's not!
How do you know if there is or there isn't?
Fuck that. You can't just say, how do you know? I know a good bit, like.
What do you know?
I've read bloody books about this and everything. I know what I'm talking about. They don't want democracy over there. What they want is Sharia law.
Who's they?
The majority of Syrians.
You don't know what the majority of Syrians want.
Well, that's true, but that's not what I mean. The most of the fighting is now being done by Islamic groups. And they say publicly, in writing, they want Sharia law.
Now you're talking about Islamic groups. That's not the majority of Syrians.
It's not, but you're just being pedantic and not listening to what I'm saying.
I'm not being pedantic. Most people want peace and democracy. That's a simple fact.
His optimism about what most people wanted was just a reflection of his own belief in the status quo. A status quo that had served him well. Look, the facts are there. I'm not making this up.
Maybe.
He had got me on a pedantic point. And now he wanted to not talk about it anymore. I wanted to change the subject myself. I thought about getting into it with him about Mariano Rajoy, who you'll remember was cheered for getting the ECB to lower Spain's deficit target from 5.3 to 5.8%. Anyway, after that he went totally rogue and ran a 10% deficit instead that year, and the next year too. At the minute, Spain's deficit is down to 3%, which is what the ECB wanted all along, so it worked, whatever it did. But what bothers me is the income inequality. Their unemployment rate is 16%. Youth unemployment is 34%. So I'm not sure what my stance is on.
And Occupy, did they solve the global financial crisis yet?
Occupy did his job. I can see its DNA in all kinds of activist movements that came after it. He looked at me in silence. My statement didn't make sense to him. But did he have so little faith that I knew what I was talking about that he didn't even challenge me on it? I hesitated as I thought about what to say. What I had said was speculative, so I tried to think of something more concrete. Well, in America they say the Bernie Sanders campaign came directly out of Occupy. In Ireland the water protests involved a lot of the same people. And now we've got the Extinction Rebellion.
Okay, well good. Keep at it.
I mean, it's hard to measure these things.
Mozambique. Should we have invested our money that time?
We had a 50-50 chance. One company did really well, the other one went bust. The Anglo-Australian company Rio Tinto found that most of its concession consisted of thermal coal rather than metallurgic coal, and they sold their coal assets at considerable loss and left Mozambique. However, the other company called Vale was a considerable success. In 2017, they produced 13 million tonnes of coal, more than double the 2.9 million tonnes they'd produced the year before.
Okay, well, it's no point learning off the facts and figures now. That was 7 years ago. You can be guaranteed we've lost our opportunity at this stage.
I was still thinking about why he didn't engage with my Occupy comment earlier. I wanted to bring it up again, but I didn't know how. And like that, the ghost was gone. I had wanted to challenge my father, but also to let him know that I understood him. But he was somewhere else now. He was worried about Jeffrey Epstein, he said, Boris Johnson, the beef crisis. I still have a lot of articles I want to go through with you all for this experiment. So before we get into it, these are the headlines. A CIA-operated drone fired missiles on insurgents, killing 6 rebels in South Waziristan, Pakistan's lawless region bordering Afghanistan, according to the Pajwak, an Afghani newspaper. Ferry capsizes in Bangladesh, at least 31 dead, 150 missing. Imam dies in arson attack on Belgian mosque, 1 dead. Tibetan teenager self-immolates on anniversary of failed uprising. More than 24 Tibetans, including several teenagers, have set themselves on fire in China over the last year. That was in The Guardian. Eurozone crisis live, Fitch raises Greece out of default, as it happened. 4 killed in mishap near Amravati. Illegal firecracker unit blast kills 2 women. Also, in the Times of India on the 13th of March 2012, 5 killed as lorry barges into tea shops.
14 killed in Iraq robbery attacks was mentioned in Dawn, the Pakistani paper. Fighting between Israel and Gaza continues for third day. Revenge attacks follow Nigeria church blast, 14 days. 14 killed in fire in Istanbul, Turkey, according to China Daily. Ireland some way out deal on Anglo 31 billion IOUs. Teenager bit lump of flesh from victim's face in club. Marlowe's killers named. Bungie 2 died mid-air. Bog body Gabruno killed over a woman. Girl 9 hit by train. 10 die in illegal dig. Fury at motorcycle sentence. Michael was everything to us. A brother, a father, a husband. Justice has not been